Any regrets at all when you look back at your life? Is there anything that you would have wanted to have done differently anyway at all?
I wouldn't change one thing. Not one thing.
He wasn't just a star. He was a symbol of class, of ease, of charm. Dean Martin could walk into a room with a glass in his hand and a joke on his lips, and instantly, everyone relaxed. He didn't chase the spotlight chased him, and it adored every second. He sang like velvet and smiled like he knew a secret the rest of the world never would. While others rehearsed every line and studied every move, Dean just showed up, smooth, unbothered, untouchable. From broken noses to broken marriages, Dean Martin built a life out of contradictions. He was always on stage, yet rarely ever seen. And that's where this story really begins. From Steubenville to Scraps, the boy who didn't belong. Before the mansions, before the million-dollar contracts, before the world started calling him the King of Cool, Dean Martin was just Dino. Dino Paul Crocetti was born on June 7, 1917, in the blue-collar steel town of Steubenville, Ohio. It wasn't Hollywood. It wasn't glamorous. It was tough, gritty, and unforgiving. The kind of place where kids either fought or got eaten alive. His parents were Italian immigrants. His father, Gaetano, was a barber. His mother, Angela, had been born in Ohio, but her roots were just as Italian. Inside the Crocetti household, only Italian was spoken. Outside those walls, the world was very different. English was foreign to Dino. He didn't learn it until he was 5, and even then, he struggled. School wasn't a safe place for him. It was a battlefield. Kids mocked his accent. Teachers dismissed him. Every word he mispronounced was a new reason to feel ashamed. He once said, "School just wasn't for me." That line became part of his act, something to get a laugh on talk shows or interviews. But it wasn't a joke. It was a shield. The truth was, Dino didn't feel smart. He felt lost. And worse, invisible. By the time he hit the 10th grade, he'd had enough. Enough of the ridicule. Enough of trying to fit into a world that didn't want him. He dropped out and never looked back. That decision could have been the end of his story. Just another poor immigrant kid swallowed up by the world. But for Dean Martin, it was only the beginning. The bare-knuckle hustler and casino crooner. After walking away from school with no diploma and no plan, Dino didn't step into fame. He fell straight into the grind. This wasn't some overnight Hollywood dream. This was survival. Steubenville didn't offer safety nets, only steel, sweat, and street smarts. And Dino learned quick. He tried to follow his father's path, becoming a barber. But he couldn't sit still, couldn't smile politely for hours at a time. It didn't fit. So he bounced from job to job. Steel mill worker, gas station attendant, bootleg liquor runner, drugstore clerk, milkman. But one job changed him and nearly broke him. Boxing. He stepped into the ring under the name Kid Crochet, a stage name for a sport with no stage, just gloves, blood, and pain. He fought 12 matches. He won 1. That's not a typo. 1. He couldn't afford proper wraps, so his fists split open with every punch. His nose, broken, his lip, scarred, his knuckles, shattered. He got beat up for dollars in back alley gyms and basement clubs. There was no glamour, only survival. And yet that ring taught him something, how to take a hit and still get up. That lesson never left him. In his early 20s, still chasing a paycheck and maybe a miracle, Dino moved to New York City. He wasn't alone. He shared a tiny apartment with fellow struggling entertainer Sonny King. 2 guys, 1 dream: get out of the gutter. But dreams don't pay rent. So they got creative. They turned their apartment into a literal fight club. No joke. They let people come in, toss a few bucks on the floor, and watch them bare knuckle box in their living room. No gloves, no rules, just punches. until someone dropped. One time, Dean even knocked Sonny out cold in front of the crowd. That was their life, waking up sore, broke, and desperate. But it was also in that same apartment, in that same city, that Dino's life began to pivot. Because when the gloves came off, the voice came out. The night that changed everything. While still picking up side gigs and dodging bills, Dino landed a job at a smoky little casino tucked behind a tobacco shop. The place was illegal, unregulated, and completely alive. It smelled like stale whiskey and adrenaline. He wasn't singing yet. He was a roulette stickman, spinning the wheel for shady high rollers. But late at night, when the tables quieted down and the crowd got loose, Dino would sing for the staff. Nothing serious, just humming old Italian tunes or crooning jazz standards in the break room. But one night, someone really listened. That someone was Ernie McKay, the leader of a local band. He wasn't just impressed, he was stunned. Dino's voice wasn't trained. It was smooth, raw, magnetic. He had what money couldn't buy, charm that bled through a microphone. McKay offered him a spot in his band, and Dino, still wearing the bruises of a life with no rhythm, said yes. That yes would change everything. He started performing in small Ohio nightclubs under the name Dino Martini, a nod to opera tenor Nino Martini. He wore cheap suits and sang to half-empty rooms, but for the first time, people clapped. Women leaned in. Bartenders turned down the lights. He had something. And then, in 1938, came Sammy Watkins. Watkins was a bigger name, a respected band leader. He liked Dino's sound, but gave him one blunt piece of advice. Change your name. Martini's too close to Nino. You need your own identity. Dino thought for a second. Dean Martin was born, building the legend. Dean and Jerry's explosive rise and quiet collapse. By the mid-1940s, Dean Martin was working steadily in nightclubs and theaters, fine-tuning his image, part crooner, part gentleman scoundrel. But something was still missing. He had the voice, he had the looks, but he didn't yet have that spark. That unpredictable element that could take him from good to unforgettable. That spark walked into his life in the form of a wild-eyed, fast-talking comedian named Jerry Lewis. It was August 1944. Dean was performing at the Glass Hat Club in the Belmont Plaza Hotel in New York City. Jerry, then just 18, was performing his own chaotic lip-sync comedy routine at the same venue. One night, after seeing Jerry perform, Dean casually said, "Hey, I saw your act. You're a funny kid." That one line would change both their lives. They quickly became friends, opposite energies drawn to the same dream. Dean was laid back, smooth, and quiet. Jerry was frantic, loud, and full of kinetic energy. On paper, they made no sense. On stage, they were magic. The act that bombed. Then blew up. Their first show together was at the 500 Club in Atlantic City on July 24th, 1946. It flopped. The audience didn't laugh. The owner, Skinny D'Amato, gave them one warning. Kill tomorrow night, or you're both done. That night, behind the club, in a grimy alleyway, Dean and Jerry rewrote their entire act. No scripts, no polish, just chaos. Jerry would interrupt Dean's singing, drop dishes, trip over furniture, and cause pure mayhem. Dean, the calm, straight man, would throw bread rolls and fire back with deadpan jabs. The next night, they performed it. And the audience exploded. They laughed, they screamed, they cried with joy. It wasn't just funny. It was revolutionary. A nightclub act that felt like two real friends clowning around with zero filter. From that point forward, the rise was rocket-fueled. Comedy gold, coast to coast. Their chemistry was raw, unscripted, and utterly infectious. Jerry once said, We didn't perform for the audience. We performed for each other. That authenticity made it impossible not to laugh. Their act spread like wildfire up and down the East Coast. Nightclubs turned into theaters. Theaters turned into television. They played the Copacabana in New York, packed shows across the country, and had audiences begging for more. By 1948, they landed their first television appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show, then known as Toast of the Town. They shared the stage with legends like Rogers and Hammerstein. And yet, Dean and Jerry stole the spotlight. But soon after, they took over radio, appearing on shows like The Martin and Lewis Show, and signed a film deal with Paramount. Their debut movie, My Friend Irma, was a smash. They weren't just entertainers, they were a phenomenon. At one point, their popularity was so massive, theater chains would flash their names on neon signs before even naming the movie. Tickets sold out just on the promise that Martin and Lewis would be in it. But even legends have breaking points: success, pressure, and the slow burn of resentment. From the outside, everything looked perfect. Dean was handsome and cool. Jerry was outrageous and hilarious. They were millionaires. The media called them the next Laurel and Hardy. Kids imitated them. Couples adored them. But inside the machine, things were breaking. Critics began praising Jerry's comedic genius, while dismissing Dean as just the good-looking guy who stood next to him. The media crowned Jerry the star, the creative force, the talent. And Dean? The lucky sidekick. That narrative ate at him. Dean had always played it cool, but privately, he was burning. He was tired of being the straight man, tired of playing second fiddle, tired of being seen as replaceable. The tension grew on set. During the filming of Three Ring Circus in 1954, Look magazine ran a photo on its cover featuring Jerry Lewis and co-star Joanne Dru. Dean was cut out completely, not even mentioned. That was it. Dean stormed onto the set, magazine in hand, and threw it at their publicist. He cursed everyone in the room and walked out. Jerry later recalled Dean's eyes changing. There was no warmth anymore, he said. Just cold. The last curtain call. Their friendship began to disintegrate. Arguments grew more frequent. Dean started showing up late to rehearsals, skipping promotional events. When asked why, he said, "Why the hell should I come in on time? There's not a damn thing for me to do." He felt like background noise in a show he helped build. On July 25, 1956, exactly 10 years after their first performance, Dean ended it. No public fight, no press conference. He simply told Jerry he was done. And just like that, Martin and Lewis was over. 10 years of laughter, of partnership, of cultural dominance, gone in a moment of quiet resolve. Dean didn't look back. He never performed with Jerry again. For decades, they didn't speak, but the pain lingered. Jerry later said, "It was like losing my brother." Dean never said much about it, just one devastating line. "I was nothing more than a straight man, and it broke me." The Rat Pack. Glamour, brotherhood, and secrets in the smoke. After walking away from the juggernaut that was Martin and Lewis, Dean Martin could have faded into footnote history, the guy who split from a comedy legend. But instead, he did the impossible. He got bigger. Hollywood assumed Jerry Lewis was the brains behind the operation. But when Dean stepped out on his own, something strange happened. He flourished. His singing career soared. His solo performances packed houses. And before long, he joined forces with a new kind of crew. Not a duo this time, but a pack. They were called the Rat Pack. And Dean Martin didn't just fit in. He became the heartbeat of it. The Rat Pack wasn't an official group. It wasn't a boy band or a franchise. It was a lifestyle. Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., Joey Bishop, Peter Lawford, and Dean Martin. 5 men who ruled the Las Vegas Strip like royalty. They performed together, drank together, gambled, joked, crashed each other's shows, and threw after-parties that blurred into sunrise. Their 1960 film, Ocean's 11, turned their image into pop culture gold. They were seen as the ultimate American cool. Tough but funny, rich but relatable, drunk but in control. But no one wore that image better than Dean. He was the quiet charmer. The guy who didn't try to out-sing Sinatra or out-joke Bishop. He didn't have to. He just strolled in with that lazy smile, half-sung a verse, winked at the crowd, and walked off stage to thunderous applause. People believed Dean was the wildest of them all, the one who lived with a drink in his hand and a cigarette in his teeth. But that was just the illusion, the apple juice in the whiskey glass. While the others lived up to the Rat Pack legend of wild nights and harder mornings, Dean didn't. His stage drink, apple juice, his slurred speech, an act. The tipsy walk, calculated. Patty Gribbo, one of Dean's backup singers, later confirmed it. He was the most sober guy in the room. Even Sammy Davis Jr. used to joke, "If this don't straighten my hair, nothing will," pointing to Dean's glass, which held nothing but juice. Dean wasn't a saint, but he wasn't the out-of-control party animal people assumed. He left parties early, skipped rehearsals, often vanished after shows without a word. Why? Because Dean Martin didn't need the noise. He was never trying to impress anyone. He played the part because it paid, because it worked. But when the curtain dropped, he wanted silence. And that made him different. Frank Sinatra once hated that. He couldn't understand why Dean didn't want to stay out until 4 a.m., drinking and gambling. It annoyed him. But over time, it earned his respect. Tom Dreesen, a comedian who toured with both men, said it best. Frank admired Dean's independence. He was his own man, even in a room full of legends. Brothers in rhythm, Dean and Frank's quiet bond. Out of all the Rat Pack members, Dean and Frank had the deepest connection. Their chemistry on stage was real, but it went beyond the lights. Their families were close. Their kids grew up together, and when Dean and Frank shared the mic, you could feel the love. The jokes, the jabs, the timing. It was all smooth because it came from something deeper than showbiz. Dean's daughter, Deanna, once said, "When they were on stage, you could see it in their eyes. The way they looked at each other. That was real respect. They had their fights, sure. Frank was fiery. Dean was ice. But their friendship never needed big words or grand gestures. It just was. Until one tragedy changed everything. A crew tied to the mob. Behind the tuxedos and laughter, the Rat Pack operated in a city built by crime. And they weren't naive to it. Frank Sinatra had well-known ties to mob bosses like Sam Giancana. Sammy Davis Jr. was friendly with known figures. Peter Lawford, being JFK's brother-in-law, rubbed shoulders with power from both sides of the law. And Dean? Dean Martin was the quiet one. But that didn't mean he was clean. Before fame, he ran liquor during Prohibition. He'd been a bare-knuckle boxer, hustled backroom games, and knew exactly who the big players were. So when mobsters sat front row at the Sands or walked backstage at the Copa Room, Dean didn't flinch. He knew how to navigate that world. One night, a group of mobsters came to thank Dean for helping them out. It was vague, loaded, dangerous. Dean didn't smile, didn't grovel. He looked them dead in the eye and said, "No. I did it for Frank." Then he walked away. No one ever approached him again. He wasn't threatening. He was just fearless, the kind of man who didn't bluff, because he never needed to. The Rat Pack cracks, but Dean remains untouchable. As the 1960s wore on, the Rat Pack started to fade. Peter Lawford got iced out after falling out with Sinatra. Sammy faced racism and controversy. Frank's temper alienated even his closest allies. But Dean? Dean stayed cool. He didn't fight. He didn't chase headlines. He just kept performing, kept recording, kept being Dean Martin. And that made him the most mysterious of them all. Because while others courted chaos, Dean disappeared into the quiet whenever he could. And yet he always showed up when it counted. On stage, on screen, and in the hearts of people who saw in him something we rarely find in entertainers today. A man who didn't need to try to be iconic, because he already was. 3 wives, 7 kids, and 1 explosive affair. Dean Martin made everything look easy. The singing, the laughter, the late-night charm. But when it came to love, things were never simple. He fell hard, married fast, and raised a family that, from the outside, looked like a Hollywood dream. But the truth was far messier. Because behind closed doors, Dean wasn't just the king of cool. He was a man searching for something, and losing more than he found. The first love. Betty MacDonald and a dream that faded. In 1941, long before the fame and flashing lights, Dean married Elizabeth Betty MacDonald. She was strong, grounded, and there during the years when he was still figuring it all out. Together they moved to Cleveland Heights, Ohio, a quiet place for a couple chasing big dreams. They had 4 children in quick succession: Craig, Claudia, Gail, and Dina. It should have been a love story. And for a while, it was. But as Dean's career started to rise, the marriage began to crack. The long nights, the travel, the pressure. It was too much. They divorced in 1949 after 8 years. Dean, surprisingly, won custody of all 4 kids, a rare outcome for the time. Betty moved to San Francisco and stayed far from the spotlight. She died in 1989, mostly forgotten by the press, but not by the children she raised. And not perhaps by Dean, because she was there before the legend, before the Tucks and the Rat Pack. She knew Dino, not Dean, and that mattered. But Dean didn't stay single for long. The true love, Jean Beager, beauty, loyalty, and heartbreak. Just 1 week after his divorce from Betty was finalized, Dean married again. Her name was Jean Beager, a stunning blonde model and former Orange Bowl queen. They'd met at a New Year's Eve party in Miami. According to Jean, "We locked eyes and I knew." It was instant. We fell madly in love. Together they had 3 children: Dean Paul Jr., Ricci, and Gina. Add in Dean's 4 children from his first marriage, and suddenly the Martins were a family of 9. Dean often joked, "The 3 words you hear most around my house are, hello, goodbye, and I'm pregnant." But behind the humor was a deep affection. Jean stood by Dean through his biggest years: the movies, the records, the Vegas shows. While the world saw him as untouchable, Jean knew his soft spots. She grounded him. For 24 years, they were one of Hollywood's golden couples, and even when they divorced in 1973, it was done quietly, without scandal or smear campaigns. Jean would later say, "He wasn't perfect, but I loved him. Always." What most people didn't know was that even after the divorce, they remained close. And when tragedy struck, it was Jean who came back, not as his wife, but as his anchor. After Jean, Dean tried marriage one last time. In 1973, he married Catherine Hahn, a receptionist at a Beverly Hills salon. They were introduced by a family friend, and the romance moved fast. Hollywood stars like Sinatra attended the wedding. It was a grand affair, but not a lasting one. They divorced in 1976, just 3 years later. They had no biological children together, but Dean adopted Catherine's daughter, Sasha, and treated her like his own. After that, Dean was done. No more marriages, no more ceremonies. The final 19 years of his life, he remained single, at least legally. And in the end, he found himself returning, again and again, to Jean. The affair no one saw coming, Years later, after Dean's death, a shocking claim would surface, one that painted a very different picture of the man fans saw as a loving husband. In her 2014 memoir, Daughter of the King, Sandra Lansky, the daughter of infamous mob boss Meyer Lansky, revealed that she had a secret affair with Dean Martin. According to her, it happened while Jean was pregnant with their daughter, Gina. Sandra wrote, "We made love 6 times in one night. I counted. Dean wanted to savor every moment. Between rounds, we drank Coca-Cola and said nothing." She claimed that they had an unspoken rule: never talk about real life, never mention spouses, careers, or guilt. To the public, Dean was the devoted husband and father, a man who played with his kids between shows and bragged about changing diapers. But Sandra's story suggested something else entirely: that even at the height of his family life, Dean was still chasing something. Passion, escape, validation? We'll never know. Dean never addressed the claim. And Jean, she never spoke about it publicly. But fans began to see Dean in a different light, not just as a cool crooner, but as a flawed man. Charming, yes, but human. Jean and Dean, a bond that survived everything. Even after their divorce, Jean and Dean remained connected, especially for their children. But it was the death of their son, Dean Paul Jr., that brought them close again in a way no one expected. Dean was never the same after losing his son. And Jean, the woman who had loved him through decades of triumph and tragedy, became his quiet support system. They weren't romantic anymore, but they were something stronger. Partners in grief. They shared memories, shared silence, shared the kind of bond that outlives marriage. Jean never remarried. She passed away in 2016 at the age of 89 after battling cancer. Their son, Richie, died just a few months before her. Their story, messy, real, complicated, never made headlines. But it was the heart of Dean Martin's life. Not the movies, not the fame. Her, the death that broke Dean. Losing his son. Losing himself. Dean Martin had built a life on effortless cool, a life that ran on jokes, jazz, and charm that looked untouchable. But even the smoothest men have soft spots. For Dean, it was his children, and the one that changed everything was Dean Paul Martin Jr. Born in 1951, Dean Paul, or Dino Jr., as many called him, wasn't just Dean's son. He was his pride, his mirror, a symbol of everything good Dean had built. He was handsome, charismatic, athletic, a tennis pro, a pop singer with the group Dino, DC and Billy, and eventually a pilot. Dean loved that his son wasn't just riding his legacy, he was making his own. Dino Jr. joined the California Air National Guard and flew F-4 Phantom jets. It was dangerous, but Dean never stopped him, because Dino Jr. was doing what most never dared, living bold. And then, one day, he was gone. The call that shattered everything. March 21st, 1987. Dean Paul Martin Jr. was piloting a military jet during a routine training mission in California. The weather turned bad. Visibility dropped. Radar lost him. Hours later, search teams found the wreckage near San Gorgonio Mountain. There were no survivors. Dean Jr. was just 35. When Dean Martin got the call, he didn't scream, didn't collapse, didn't ask why. He went silent. Those who knew him said it was the moment the light went out. The smile? Forced. The voice? Quiet. The jokes? Stopped. This wasn't grief you could see. It was the kind that hollowed a man out from the inside. Dean pulled away from everything. Goodbye to the stage, goodbye to the world. At the time, Dean had reunited with Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. for a Rat Pack comeback tour. The The fans were thrilled. The reviews were glowing. But Dean's heart wasn't in it anymore. After Dino Jr.'s death, Dean quit the tour midway through. No announcement, no farewell. He just left. Frank was furious. Sammy tried to convince him to return. But Dean wouldn't budge. He couldn't sing the old songs anymore, not when everything inside him had changed. He started showing up less, recording less, appearing less. When people asked where he was, friends would just shake their heads and say, "He's still grieving." The silence between friends, even his bond with Sinatra, once unshakable, began to fade. Tom Dreesen, their longtime friend and opening act, later said, "That was the moment things broke between Frank and Dean. Not because they fought, but because Dean stopped talking." Frank was hurt, but he understood. He once told an interviewer, "Dean has always been like the air I breathe, always there, always close, but now I can't find him anymore." That was Dean's way. He didn't fall apart in public. He just disappeared. The Dean the world didn't see. For fans, Dean Martin still existed on old records and reruns of The Dean Martin Show. But the real Dean? He was now a ghost in his own life. He stopped doing interviews, rarely left his house, lived alone in Beverly Hills. His world got smaller, quieter. Those who visited him in the 1990s said he barely spoke. He watched old westerns, read comic books, smoked, drank a little, not the way the tabloids imagined, just enough to dull the edges. Friends brought up old memories. He didn't respond. They asked about performing again. He waved them off. He wasn't angry, just done. And the pain, still there. You could see it in his eyes, even behind the sunglasses. Author William Keck, who interviewed Dean near the end, later wrote, "He would smile, but it never reached his eyes. He wasn't playing a role anymore. He just didn't want to feel." A private goodbye. Dean never spoke publicly about Dino Jr.'s death. Not once. No interviews, no statements, no grand tribute. That silence said more than words ever could. Jerry Lewis, who hadn't spoken to Dean in decades, later said, "That was the end of him. That boy was everything to him. And when he died, so did Dean." It was Jerry, of all people, who understood it best. Because for all their differences, Dean and Jerry were the same in one way. They both loved their children more than the spotlight. And when that bond broke, Dean stopped being Dean Martin. He became Dino again. Quiet, withdrawn, the same boy who once walked out of school and never looked back. Only now, he had nowhere left to go. The final act, loneliness, lung cancer, and the last goodbye. By the early 1990s, Dean Martin was a man the world remembered, but rarely saw. His voice still played on radios. His movies aired on late-night TV. But the man himself? He had vanished. He wasn't hiding from fame. He just didn't care anymore. His days were quiet, spent mostly in his Beverly Hills home. A once vibrant mansion filled with laughter and music had become a silent retreat. The phone barely rang. The parties were over. The tuxes were stored away. And Dean? He spent most of his time alone. Those close to him said he never stopped mourning. He didn't talk about Dino Jr., but he didn't need to. The grief sat on him like a second skin. Always there, always present. People would visit. Friends, family, old colleagues. They'd try to cheer him up, bring up funny stories from the Rat Pack days, old songs, old jokes. Dean would smile, but not for long, because the sparkle that had once lit up Hollywood was now a flicker, barely holding on. A body catching up to the pain. Dean had always been a heavy smoker. It was part of the image, the cigarette dangling casually from his fingers, the fog of smoke swirling around him on stage. But the truth behind that smoke was deadly. In 1993, Dean was diagnosed with lung cancer, Doctors recommended surgery. It could extend his life, maybe even give him a few more years of peace. Dean refused. He didn't want the hospital stays, the tubes, the fight. He'd seen enough loss, enough pain. And if this was how his story ended, he didn't want it stretched out. He told his friends, "Let it come. I've had a good life." But had he? That question hung over him like a shadow. For Christmas Day, 1995, the end of Cool. Dean Martin died on December 25th, 1995. Christmas Day. He passed away in his sleep at home from acute respiratory failure caused by emphysema. He was 78. No final words, no cameras, no fanfare. Just silence. The world found out the next morning. Headlines mourned the king of cool. Fans flooded radio stations with requests for That's Amore and Everybody Loves Somebody. In Las Vegas, where Dean had once reigned supreme, something unheard of happened. The lights on the strip went dark for 1 full minute. It was the city's way of saying goodbye. To the man who helped build its legend, who brought class to chaos, who made cool look effortless. The funeral, a quiet goodbye to a loud life. Dean's funeral was small, private. No stadiums, no media circus. He was buried at the Westwood Village Memorial Park Cemetery in Los Angeles, the same resting place as Marilyn Monroe, Natalie Wood, and Truman Capote. His crypt bore just one line. Everybody loves somebody sometime, a lyric, a legacy, a truth. At the service, friends gathered, old Hollywood faces, singers, comedians, family. One moment stood above the rest. As the room fell silent, Rosemary Clooney, Dean's longtime friend and musical peer, stood up. No microphone, no spotlight, just her voice. She began to sing. Everybody loves somebody sometime. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. It wasn't just a song. It was a prayer, a farewell, a final nod to a man who made the world feel a little warmer, a little funnier, and a little more alive. And when she finished, no one clapped. They just sat in the stillness, letting the quiet say what words never could. The mask he wore until the end. Dean Martin was a master illusionist. He created a version of himself that the world could fall in love with, a walking cocktail of charm, danger, and humor. But that was the act. The real Dean? That was the man who didn't talk much, who adored comic books, who never got over the loss of his son, who loved deeply but quietly, who, even at his peak, still saw himself as the outsider. And maybe that's what made him so human, so magnetic. Because even if we didn't know exactly who he was, we felt something behind that voice, behind those eyes, something gentle, something wounded, something real. What remains? Dean Martin left behind. Over 50 million records sold, 85 films and television appearances, a Las Vegas era built partly on his back, countless impersonators who never got close, and a persona so strong it's still being imitated today. But numbers don't measure a man. What remains is the smile that never quite reached his eyes, the laughter that often masked the ache, the songs that carried a kind of sadness even in their sweetness, and the legend of a man who didn't need to shout, didn't need to chase. He just walked through life with his hands in his pockets, his heart behind his ribs, and the whole world trying to figure him out. The final question. So, did Dean Martin ever find peace? Did he ever forgive himself for walking away from Jerry? Did he ever stop aching for the son he lost? Did he ever stop being Dino, the immigrant kid who didn't belong, and fully become Dean Martin? We may never know. And maybe that's how he wanted it. Because the greatest magic trick he ever pulled wasn't the songs, or the shows, or even the Rat Pack. It was keeping the real Dean Martin hidden until the very end. Was Dean Martin truly happy? Or was the man we all admired just playing a part until the curtain finally closed? Let us know what you think in the comments below. And if you love stories like this, filled with glamour, heartbreak, mystery, and truth, hit that like button, subscribe, and stay tuned. We've got more Hollywood legends to uncover, one story at a time. We'll see you in the next one.